Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Annual Vibrant Living Expo and Culinary Showcase. My name is Monica Landry, and it is my extreme pleasure to introduce our next presenter. Soria is founder and director of Living Light Culinary Arts Institute and co-owner with husband Dan Latterman of 3 other eco-friendly businesses. Often called the mother of gourmet raw cuisine, Cherie has taught students and world-famous chefs and instructors from around the world for over 16 years. Cherie is also the author of 3 books, including Angel Foods, Healthy Recipes for Heavenly Bodies, and the newly released Raw Food Revolution Diet, Feast, Lose Weight, Gain Energy, Feel Younger. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Please give a warm welcome to Cherie Soria.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And what many of you may not know is that I have a 3rd book called Comienda Pura Vida, and that means Eating Pure Life. It was written for the Spanish-speaking world because I spend a lot of my time in Costa Rica, and I have a great following there. And I wrote it with a dear friend of mine who is very well known in Costa Rica and Central America and South America as well, Rodrigo Crespo. So I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of my favorite recipes from my Latin heritage, and I'm really happy to share them with you today. I'll also be sharing with you several different techniques that can help you to create the flavor, texture, and appearance of cooked foods when you're not cooking at all. And this, of course, will help to maintain the nutrient density of the food, the integrity of the food, and help to transfer that life-giving force to you from the food. Whereas, of course, if we cook it, then we're eating dead food. Sometimes I enjoy dead food. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a purist. I do especially enjoy cooked beans. I have never found a substitute for cooked beans. Sprouted beans are really good for you, and I like them from time to time on my salad, but it's not a bowl of cooked beans. And so sometimes I have that. And I don't have any fear around food, personally. I don't have issues with food that would keep me from occasionally enjoying something cooked. But I have a very strong ethical belief in taking care of the earth and taking care of animals as well as my own health. So, of course, I don't make beans with any animal products in them. And in fact, my dad makes my beans for me. That's a little special thing that we have going, and he doesn't put any oil in them. So I feel really good about eating them. I wouldn't eat them before I came on stage because they bring my energy down. It's a little harder to digest cooked food anyway, and especially cooked beans take a lot more from my body to digest. And so I want to stay light. And so I wouldn't eat something like that unless I didn't have to do something afterwards that required me to be right on the money. A lot of mental energy, a lot of physical energy. I wouldn't do it before I exercised or anything like that. So you just need to know, if you're going to choose to eat cooked food, when to eat it and when not to. In my personal health regime, I really don't eat after about 6 p.m. at night, because if I do, then I have to sleep more hours to make up for the fact that I'm still digesting food when I go to bed. And so I eat lighter at night, and I wouldn't eat something like beans any later than about 4 p.m. That's usually my limit when it comes to something that's a little bit heavier protein, more condensed protein, and takes longer to digest. So anyway, today I'm going to be sharing with you, as I said, 2 of my favorite recipes. One I created as a substitute for a Spanish-style or Mexican-style rice. I love Mexican rice, and I miss it. And I had a friend who had celiac disease and couldn't eat grains of any kind. So I decided to make this special rice for her, and I wanted to use the ingredients of Mexico. So I chose cabbage. And I'm going to show you how to create a dish that is so similar to rice. It has the same flavors, the same kind of mouthfeel and texture as Spanish rice would have. And I think you're going to find it very satisfying. And we'll also be talking about all of the flavors of Mexico at the same time. I'm also going to be sharing with you a salsa recipe that's very different. It's not your usual salsa. It's tomato and avocado salsa. All of these recipes, by the way, are in the recipe booklet that you can purchase in the marketplace, or if you have a ticket, a 3-day Expo ticket, you will get the recipes downloadable absolutely free. And those of you who are watching live via the internet and you signed up for the whole package of live via the internet, you will also be able to receive the recipe packet online, downloadable free of charge. So we're going, and by the way, I want to introduce you to my assistant here. This is Robin, and Robin has recently graduated from the Gourmet Chef Certification Training, and she also graduated from the Pastry Arts Unbaked course. So she's got a lot of information in the last 7 weeks, and then has been helping out in the kitchen as well. You want to share a couple words about your experience with your training? There we go.
It's really been a fabulous experience, not only to help me retranslate my kitchen from Chinese, which is what I felt happened to it when I went raw. So our food is better at home, but it also helps me share the wonders of raw food with people who eat a normal diet and show them how delicious it is. It's been great.
Good. I'm so glad. Yeah. The course includes the basics, how to use all the equipment, learning great knife skills, flavor balancing, which is really, really foundational and important to understand which flavors balance out which flavors, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. You learn how to make cheeses and sauerkrauts and all the kinds of things that we've done here. You learn recipe development. You even learn how to teach classes. In just 17 days, you feel confident about teaching classes. And all of the students, many of them who'd never been in front of an audience before, felt really ready to teach a class at the end of that 3 weeks so that they could go out and share their passion. Even if it isn't for a career change, even if it's just to be able to share it with friends. It really feels nice to know that you can organize yourself well, you have everything that you need, you can explain yourself well, and you can share this information. How many of you are passionate enough that you think that you would like to share the information with others? You may not have the skills now, but if you had the skills, would you want to do that? Yeah, most of you would. And it's because you have found how beneficial this lifestyle is for you. We all get a little bit of that missionary zeal. It doesn't mean that you have to preach at people, but it means if they ask you for help, if they ask you, why are you so vibrant, what has made the change in your life, that you feel confident enough to talk about it. So I encourage you all to learn as much as you can from whatever method or means that you can, so that you do feel confident. And it also gives you a little bit more of a foundation in understanding why it's working for you. Okay, so let's get started. Enough chit-chat. I'm going to start by showing you how to make this fabulous Mexican cabbage dish that's so much like rice. And I'm going to be using a food processor for this, but even if you don't have a food processor, don't let that stop you. You could do this all with a knife. And particularly if you take our knife skills class and learn good knife skills. Or if you're already a chef and have good knife skills, you certainly could do it. But I'm going to, as long as I have my food processor out here, I'm going to show you how to use it, because some people are intimidated by the food processor. I'm going to use it for slicing to begin with, but if you didn't have a food processor, you could just slice this cabbage by hand using your chef knife. And you would do it by, if you take a look at a cabbage, of course it's round, and you'll see that if you were to cut it sideways, crosswise this way, you wouldn't get long strands. You would get short, choppy strands. But if you cut it this way, you'd get these long strands. Can you see that? And the long strands are what I'm looking for. So if you were going to cut this, you would lay it flat. This way also has long strands. Lay it flat and cut it with a knife like this. So you have just thin strands. Notice as I'm cutting how I hold my fingertips back. I curl them under. And that way I'll never hurt myself. That's really important. And you don't have to be fast. Just, take your time and do it well. Now here's a Cuisinart. And you could use any kind of food processor to do this. And right now what I'm using is a slicing blade. A slicing blade. So that's in there. And this is a number 4 slicing blade, which is the blade that comes with your food processor. Okay. And I'll put this back together. And now I'm going to lay the cabbage in flat. just like this, because I remember I want that to be long shreds. If I were to put it in this way, then I'd get the shortcuts, right? But I want the long shreds. So now I can place it down like this. Okay, and that was it. So now I have my sliced cabbage, and I'm going to put that in here. All right, so I have my nice long shreds. And now I'm going to replace the shredding blade, or the slicing blade, with an S blade. This is an S blade, and that's the blade that you, most of the time, you would be using in your food processor. It's just, it's the blade that is for pureeing or liquefying, processing, or chopping. Let's put that away so people don't have their view in. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it on for just a minute, not for very long at all. Okay, let's take a look and see if that's enough. Yeah, that looks really good. So what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for a texture that is similar to rice. Can you see that? And it's going to shrink a little bit more when I add salt. And anytime I add salt or acid, like tomatoes, lemon juice, anything like that, or orange juice, it will shrink a little bit more. And the reason is that salt and acid break down the cellular structure, and what happens is then it releases its water. So the outer fiber opens up, and the moisture comes out. And then, of course, the fiber that's left is reduced in bulk. It also softens it and makes it more palatable, so it's not so crunchy. So not only is it less crunchy because it's smaller, but also it actually has softened it. So now we're going to remove the S blade. We always want to take that out first and be very careful with it. And I'm going to transfer this to a bowl. And I want to remove my S blade so it doesn't get in the way. I see people trying to work around the S blade, and that really is totally not necessary. It just hampers your ability to get in there. Okay, now this is such a simple dish, and all I really have to do now is start to add my other ingredients. But I'd like to share with you how to chop a tomato. I have a tomato already chopped here, but there's a lot of different ways, of course, that you could chop a tomato. It depends on the tomato, and it also depends on whether or not you want the juices from the tomato. If you're making something where you don't want it to be really juicy, then here's a trick that could really help you. You can cut around the seed bed, just like that. And see, there's all the juice inside. And just keep cutting around the seed bed. And now you have the pulp and the fruit of the tomato without all of the juice. Now in this case, I want the juice. I want the juice because I'm going to be adding some sun-dried tomato powder, and it wants the juice to be able to fluff it up again. So I'm going to go ahead and do this just a little bit just to show you, because I already have a beautiful tomato chopped up, but I kind of want to show you a little bit about how to dice a tomato small. So first of all, I have it cut in sheets, and once again, I'm cutting it with my fingertips back, and I'm cutting slowly so you can see what I'm doing. This is called a julienne slice. Once I've cut a julienne slice, then all I have to do is turn it sideways, use the back of my knife. You never want to scrape the blade of your knife along the cutting board, but use the back of your knife to bring it all together, and then you just have to cut crosswise. And look at these beautiful little dices that you have there. Okay, isn't that nice? So if you wanted to have a fine dice, which I do in this case, then you would do it that way. And here, this one is nice and juicy, you can see, and I want that in this particular dish. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start adding some of the other wonderful flavors of Mexico. And I did stick with the flavors of Mexico here. Cabbage is something that they eat all over Mexico, and do you know why? Because it's easy to grow, because it doesn't really need refrigeration for quite a long time. And a lot of places in Mexico, they still don't have refrigeration. And so, whereas lettuce would wilt after a day, cabbage could stay for several days in a pantry. And so it's very hearty, and it's actually very, very health promoting as well. So this is a recipe, by the way, that's in my book, The Raw Food Revolution Diet, In fact, both of the recipes that I'm sharing with you today are from that book. So we have our tomatoes, and tomatoes, again, are a flavor of Mexico. Can you think of other flavors of Mexico that we might want to put in this dish? Cilantro. Cilantro would be very good. You could add cilantro to this, even though it's not in the recipe. Garlic. Well, let's add some garlic, by all means. Here's some garlic right here. This is garlic puree. And the way I handled the garlic puree was I took, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you in my next demo, but I used a whole clove of garlic peeled, and I just used it on this tool here that's called a microplaner, and it's wonderful for pureeing, and I'm going to show you that in my next demo. So right now, anyway, this has been already pureed, so I'm going to add that to my mixture. And I'm also going to add some onion powder. Now, why am I choosing to add onion powder instead of fresh onion? Because, yeah, fresh onion is very pungent. It's very powerful. And what I want is, I want to create a dish that tastes like it's cooked. And onion powder will permeate the dish in a much more cooked way. You'll get to taste that kind of cooked onion flavor instead of the raw onion that you might take a bite of. And even if you try to liquefy the onion, actually raw onion, when it's liquefied, becomes very bitter and really takes over the flavor. And I don't want that. So that's why I'm choosing to use the onion powder. It's a little bit crunchy because this demo tray was put together and then refrigerated. So that's why I'm peeling it out of there. I'm also adding another flavor of Mexico, and that is cumin. Cumin. Oh, the Mexicans love cumin, but you know what? Almost every culture loves cumin. It is one of the top favorite spices in the world. They use it in the Far East, in the Near East, in the Latin American countries. I don't know. I don't know if they use it in Northern Europe. I can't think of Northern Europe too. Everywhere. Everyone loves cumin. So there it is. And you know what cumin is made from? Coriander. That's right. Made from coriander. Okay, now here I am going to be adding some onions. And onions and cumin and garlic are all pungent flavors, aren't they? They're very pungent. And they add drama. The pungent flavors add drama. And we all love a little drama in our lives. So it's a good thing to add. And the Mexican people really know how to spice food. They are masters of spicing foods and bringing balance to the food. So it's very exciting, I think, to be able to create a Mexican dish raw. All right, and here I'm adding some chili powder. Now, chili powder, this is Fiesta brand, It's, for fresh Fiesta, I can say that word, means party, festival, Fiesta brand chili powder. So, I know why I'm confused. It's Frontier brand Fiesta style chili powder. So Frontier brand is a great spice company that makes organic spices, and they have more than one chili powder. So this is their Fiesta style chili powder. Now, chili powders are a combination of spices. Like curry is a combination of spices. It's not one thing. It's a combination. And so every curry is a little different. Every chili powder is a little different. And so you can taste different ones and try them, and you may find that you like one in a particular dish and another in another dish. Some of them will be more spicy. Some of them will have more cumin. Some will have more garlic and onions. So try different ones. And maybe you need to make a little bit of a mark on your spice container that says which one you like for different things. But I encourage you to think about buying small amounts of your spices. Don't keep them for more than about 6 months. Keep them in dark glass containers in a cupboard. Because if you keep them for too long, they lose their flavor, they lose their color and their pungency. In fact, if they're organic, you can even have little bugs growing in them. One time I went over to a friend's house and I was putting together a salad and I had forgotten my paprika. So I asked, do you have paprika? Oh, yes, I have some in my spice cabinet somewhere. So somewhere was the key word I should have been listening for. So I reached in, I finally found the paprika somewhere in the back, and without even thinking, I poured it over my dish, and all of a sudden, my dish was crawling. The whole top was crawling. They looked like paprika when I looked at it in the jar, but they were paprika-colored, teeny little spiders. And if they weren't crawling, I wouldn't have known it. So I have no idea how long that paprika had been there, but make sure you go home and clean out your spice cabinet. All right. Now I'm adding some salt. And as I said, the salt is going to help to break down the cellular structure here, as will the tomatoes. And speaking of tomatoes, here in salt, by the way, is the universal flavor enhancer, isn't it? Every country uses salt. Even animals love salt, but salt is an addictive substance. The more you eat, the more you need to get the same rush. And that's why a lot of people who eat a lot of salt, when I say addictive, I don't mean that you crave salt, but what I mean is that you don't get the same flavor enhancement anymore after a while. You have to keep having more and more. So people who like salt like it because their taste buds are actually polluted, and they can't enjoy the flavor of food without it. So what my suggestion is taste the food before you add the salt. That's the first thing. And then if you need a little bit, use half as much as you think you need. And just, grin and bear it. And pretty soon you'll find that that's really enough. And then you can cut back even a little more until you find that the flavor that the chef intended for it to have with the right amount of salt is really adequate. So that's one way that you can do that. You can cut back. And you'll find that you can really appreciate it. When I was at Dr. Ann Wigmore's, I found that after a while, I could eat food unsalted completely. And, I didn't think I ever could. Now I am adding sun-dried tomato powder. Now, sun-dried tomato powder finally now can be purchased, again, from Frontier brand spices, organic sun-dried tomato powder. But it's much more expensive to buy it than it is to make it yourself. If you have a high-speed blender, you can buy your sun-dried tomatoes, especially if they are hard like this. They have to be hard in order to make it work. You put it in your Vitamix or other high-speed blender, or you can break it apart and put it in a little spice grinder if you just need a little bit. And you will be able to make it into a powder. And then I think it costs like a third as much. Now, I don't know if that would pay for a Vitamix, but, personally, I wouldn't be without my Vitamix. I love my Vitamix. It's a great tool, and it's not a mandatory tool, but I deserve to have, everything that makes food quicker and easier and more beautiful, and it certainly does. And now, I think I'm going to mix this up a little bit before I add the oil, because once I add the oil, it's more likely to absorb into those powders, and I really want it to be integrated into everything. So, by the way, I'm using what I call my second hands. I love to get my hands in food, but it doesn't look so nice, even though I've washed my hands before I've come out here, and I've learned never, ever to touch my face with my hands. I know, some of you haven't learned that lesson yet, but if you do, you're much less likely to get sick. Touching your face is not a good thing. So now I added my olive oil, and by the way, if you are on an oil-free diet, just omit the olive oil. You don't have to replace it with anything. The olive oil gives it, of course, a little bit more richness. One of the things that oil does is it helps to hold the flavors in your mouth longer. So what it does is it greases your mouth, and all those flavors are in the grease. And so rather than the flavors being swallowed by your saliva really quickly, well, your saliva doesn't swallow the flavors, but it helps to wash them down, then the oil is in there coating your mouth and holding those flavors. But you don't want to use too much, and you don't need to use too much. In my book, Raw Food Revolution Diet, which I wrote with 2 dietitians, we talk a lot about fat, and one of the things that I had to do when I started writing that book was I had to agree that if they discovered that the raw food diet was too high in fat, that I was going to come up with recipes that would reduce the fat to promote the healthiest possible diet. And I agreed. But I had no idea what I was agreeing to, because I had to cut so much fat out of my recipes. And I learned how to do that. I learned how to use other ingredients in place of fat without cutting the flavor. That was the big trick. I was not going to cut the flavor. If I had to do that, I wouldn't write the book. But I was able to do it. It took us 3 years to write that book. We did a lot of nutritional research, and in fact, they told me in the beginning that I might not like what they came up with, because they weren't raw foodists, by the way. They were registered dietitians. And they said, no, nobody's ever done a book like this. We don't know what we're going to find when we start researching it, and you may not like what we come up with. And I said, I have so much anecdotal information about people regaining their health from a raw food diet that I just believe that we're going to be able to find the research to support that this diet not only meets but exceeds the needs of the human body. And indeed, we found that. But I had to change some of those recipes, you know, because too much fat is too much fat. Even if you're like me, not fat, you still don't want to overload your body with fat. It's just not a good idea. It's not the best place to get your calories. Okay, so in my family, my family comes from central Mexico, which is like California when it comes to what they can grow. We always had peas in our Mexican rice, and so I'm adding peas to this rice. Seems like probably more peas than I actually need. Now you can use frozen peas if you can't get fresh peas. This time of year we can get fresh peas, which is wonderful. You can also get fresh peas and lay them out on a platter, put them in your freezer and freeze them yourself, and then put them in Ziploc bags to keep for when they're not in season. You can also do that with corn, by the way, so that you don't have to buy it frozen when it has been blanched if you really want to have it raw. It's still, because it's been frozen, you're still going to lose some of the nutrient value. I'm not going to kid you. But you're not going to lose a lot. And it's still going to have a lot of vibrancy, and you're going to get the flavor, and it's going to seem more like cooked food. And for me, that makes a difference. I want that. So here we go. This is it, and I'm going to show you what it looks like on a plate. And I chose a leaf plate that just, I think, looks very pretty. I'm one that really enjoys having food served beautifully and, you know, in the right kind of plate. So I have a variety of plates. And if you wanted to serve this warm, which we actually do at the school, we serve it warm, what I suggest that you do is put it in the dehydrator. And if you're making enough of it, you could, and this is what we do because we make quite a lot of it when the students make it themselves, we put it in a dish like this. And here's a great trick. This is a Pyrex pan. We use a dehydrator. And watch this. Isn't that great? It slides right in there. Do I have it level? No, it's not level? Okay. There, is that level? No, I can't see from this angle. Okay, there it is. This is my travel dehydrator, and I use it just for show. The reality is this is a 5 tray. If you're going to buy a brand new Excalibur dehydrator, buy a 9 tray. You know, it doesn't take up any more space on your counter. It's just much higher. And so it has 9 trays instead of 5. And if you're going to make a batch of flax crackers or something, you know, why make 5 trays when you can make 9 trays? It doesn't take any more time, and then it's going to last you a lot longer. But anyway, these Pyrex pans fit perfectly in there. So I would put the cabbage in there for about half an hour. I would turn it up high, though. I wouldn't just leave it on 105, which is what we consider safe for longer term for warming or dehydrating. But if something is very high in water content, you can turn up your dehydrator almost all the way up. It takes a long time before the product actually starts to evaporate. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that the product becomes warm as quickly as possible. If you just put this in and let it sweat, which is what happens when you put it in at a very low temperature. And I know a lot of people think, well, lower is better. But that's not true when it's high in water content, because you actually can create a little petri dish out of this machine. Because what you have is you have this beautiful, fresh product that's just sitting in there sweating. When really what you want to do is you want to get it evaporating as quickly as possible. So turn it up if it's high in water content, and then turn it down after an hour or so, depending on how, if you want it to be warm. We can warm this quickly if we spread it out more flat in a pan like I just showed you. But if it's very high, it's going to take a lot longer, right? Because you have to get that warmth down into the core of the product. So spreading it out thinly, you'll get it to dehydrate or to warm up more quickly. Otherwise, it's going to have to be in there for probably an hour. Again, it can still be at a high temperature. Then, if you're going to dehydrate it much longer, you'd have to turn it down. But you wouldn't want to dehydrate this much longer. You don't want to dehydrate it, you just want to warm it. If you were making crackers or something like that, it's very thin, then you don't need to start turning it up. You can just put it on 105 right from the beginning, because it's going to start evaporating really quickly because you have a very thin layer. Does that make sense? Does that help? Good. All right, so isn't that beautiful? Is that and I don't know if you can smell it, but it really smells wonderful. So there you go. Thank you very much. And I have a question from Doris. Yes. Now, here's a good question that Doris has. She understands that 118 degrees is where you start to really have the integrity of the enzymes become diminished. And that is true. If you have it at over 118 degrees for 20 minutes, you're going to start losing the activity of the enzymes. However, this is going to depend, again, on the food, not the air temperature. The food temperature is what matters. So you could turn this up to 140 if it's something like this for 20 minutes or half an hour, and the food temperature still wouldn't be 118 degrees. You have to have a thermometer to test it, and I have been a tester of the Excalibur dehydrator for over a decade. I have been testing it using a thermometer, trying their different ones and so forth. So I'm very well aware of how the dehydrator works. It's one of the things that we teach our students. And now here's the other thing about a dehydrator, is it spikes and ebbs. So I don't tell people to turn it on 118 degrees if it's going to be in there for longer than just warming, because at 118 degrees, it's going to be too hot some of the time. Because the temperature, once the elements go on, the temperature comes up above 118 degrees, and then it'll shut itself off again, it'll come back up, it'll shut itself off again, and so you're going to end up having it warmer than you want. And that's why we consider 105 to be safe, because at that point, we don't have to worry about the food ever reaching 118, even if it has no moisture left in it. And that's when it gets hot, is when it has no moisture left in it. Because just the way we were designed, when we perspire, it cools the body. I mean, that's physics. It happens with the food as well. Okay, so let's move on. Now I'm going to share with you another wonderful dish that I really love. And this is a corn and tomato and avocado salsa. It's absolutely wonderful. And of course it has to have corn in it. And so I'm going to show you how to get the corn off of the cob. We're going to start with that. Here is a ear of corn that's fresh. This time of year, of course, you can get fresh corn. If you can't get fresh corn, you can use frozen. And I suggest, if you're going to use frozen, to freeze your own. But if you don't have any and you really don't care about it being 100% raw, if you're making it for people who are cooked food eaters anyway, you could still make it with frozen corn. Just make sure you buy organic. You know that corn, if it's not organically grown, it has GMOs. So you don't want GMO corn. All right, now I am using a mandolin. This is a mandolin. And I'm using it on the thick slicing blade. And you could cut the corn off of the cob just by holding it flat here and just sliding your knife along the side. But when you do that, sometimes if you're not careful, well, first of all, it flies all over the kitchen, as you probably know. You have to put up little barriers so it doesn't go everywhere. And then the other thing is you sometimes cut into the cob, and you end up having this tough bite because there's cob attached to the corn. So I'm just going to show you another way of doing that. I'm going to use this mandolin, which is a great tool if you know how to use it. And if you are afraid of using it, you can use one of these gloves. this is a glove that helps to protect you from getting cut. And when you're first learning how to use a knife, it's not a bad idea to get a glove like this, because you may forget that, if your fingers are out in front, they can get cut, and if they're not, they can't. One of the things that we teach in knife skills is how to hold fruits and vegetables properly when you're cutting them. But this really helps a lot. You see how nice and clean that is, but it didn't cut into the cob. That's the important thing. Whenever you're using this, however, you do want to keep your hand flat. It's hard to tell that in the camera. It may look like my fingers are dangerously close, but I know that I can actually do this without a glove on, and I won't cut myself again. And I've learned the hard way about how to keep from cutting myself using a mandolin. All right, so there it is. Now, there's plenty of, I'm going to stop right there because I'm getting into the cob. I can feel that. There's plenty of good stuff left here, and the way I get that off is to take a fork, and I put the round side up and the convex side down, and I use it just like so. You can see that clearly, just like that. And I just scrape it off. Now, the reason that I use it this way is look at how much I'm capturing, and it's not splattering all over my face. You like all these little tips? Okay, just keep watching. I have about 40 years experience preparing vegetarian food, so you ain't seen nothing yet. All right, so we already have that prepared by our beautiful assistant, so I'm going to put that aside, and we'll add that to our bowl, and I'm going to eat that for lunch. And here we have some cherry tomatoes that have been quartered. These are beautiful cherry tomatoes, and they were pretty large cherry tomatoes, so we're going to have a nice chunky salsa here. And if you don't have cherry tomatoes, you can use regular tomatoes, no problem at all. And we're going to add some bell peppers, and I'm just going to show you a little bit about how to cut the peppers as well. This pepper is kind of lumpy, but it still can work very easily. You see where this rounded part is here? I'm going to cut that off right there, and then I'm going to cut the other end off as well. And there's nothing wrong with this part. You can chop it up by itself separately. Or you can put it in a smoothie or a soup or anything like that. And then I'm going to just make one cut right down the middle and open it up. Okay? And then I can take this out. And I have a nice flat surface to work with. See how easy that is? And I can take off a little bit more of the pith part, the little pithy part here. Actually, there's nothing wrong with this little pithy part. I would not throw it away. I really throw very little away. I have too much respect for the earth to throw food away, unless it's not edible. I mean, unless it's spoiled. Of course, I wouldn't do that. But otherwise, bits and pieces like this are perfectly fine to eat. I will put it in a dressing or a soup, blended soup, because it doesn't show. So now I'm just cutting this into julienne strips. And once again, I'm just going to demonstrate it. I'll put this aside. Once again, very, very simple. I turn it to its side, use the back of my knife to gather it, bundle it together with my fingertips back. Then I can just come along and dice it. It's really, really simple. And we have a knife skills class starting tomorrow for any of you that can stay. And you would learn how to do all of this and feel really confident doing it. Thank you very much. So we'll put this in the bowl along with the ones that my trusty assistants already did for me. And I won't need those. And I'm going to add some more salsa ingredients here. We have some green onion, which I really like in salsa. We have some garlic, and as I promised, I'm going to show you how to use this great tool that was invented by the wife of a carpenter. You can well imagine that. This is garlic, but you could also use it for ginger. There's a lot of things that you can use it for. I like it better than a garlic press because it purees the garlic instead of making it into little plugs. And that's really nice. And watch this. I see people sometimes trying to scrape out the garlic from here, but watch. That's all you have to do. Just a little tap, and it's done. All right, I'm adding a little bit of salt to this, of course, to enhance the flavor. Oops, A little bit of lemon juice. I'll bet that was too tart of lemon juice, and that's why I spilled some. And I trust you. And here's a little bit of oil. And again, you can leave out the oil if you want to. No problem there. And here we have some cilantro. And somebody mentioned cilantro earlier. Yes, cilantro is a very popular herb. Cilantro, like anything green, is bitter. And that's why it's so nice to have other ingredients that are sweet and tart in with something that's bitter. Because sweet and tart help to balance bitter flavors. And so here we have tomatoes, which are sweet, peppers, which are sweet, and corn, which is sweet. And so having something bitter actually brings balance to the whole mix. And we also have lemon juice. Well, a little lemon juice anyway. All right, so what I don't want is I don't want these stems, but I'm going to use them to help me control the rest of it. And a few little stems aren't going to bother me at all. This is country food, so I don't have to painstakingly take off all the leaves. So I'm going to start. In fact, I think I'll just bundle all of the leaves together. I'm going to kind of pull them back so I have a nice place to start and roll them. And it's just going to control everything for me. It's almost as if I were doing a chiffonade, which is when you gather the leaves together and you stack them on top of each other and you roll them and you slice them and they make a long shred. And that's another thing that you would be learning in the knife skills class, which starts tomorrow, just in case you forgot. Okay, and now these stems are wonderful in juice and soup, so we're not going to throw those away. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They just don't have the mouthfeel that we want. Okay, so now this has been cut one way, and now I'm going to go through and cut them the other way. And I don't want them really finely minced. So the important thing whenever you're mincing greens like this is to make sure that you mince them when they're dry. If they're wet when you mince them, they all clump together and stick together, and they don't have that. You can't use them as garnish, and I really like to use them as garnish. Okay, I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to use of this, but I think that's too much, so I'm going to put that aside and see what it looks like. This is not rocket science. I can make this any way I want. The recipe is just a guideline. Okay, so if you don't like cilantro, anybody here not like cilantro? Oops. Should have asked that first. You know, cilantro is one of those things that you either like it or you don't. And there's no in between. The good news is, after you've been on a raw food diet for a while, that could change. And I find that it does change quite often with people who come to the school. Now, what I've done here is I've cut this avocado all the way around. I'm going to give it a little turn, and then I have a nice clean avocado. And I am going to dice it right in the shell. Okay? So I cut it finely, just like that, nice and straight lines, just to the edge of the shell. Best not to cut through. And then I'm going to turn it to the side and do the same thing again. Now you have to be aware when you're cutting like this. You could, of course, do it this way if you don't feel comfortable cutting in your hand. Like I'm comfortable with it because I've been doing this for so long. I know I can feel the point of my knife when it reaches the shell. And then I can take my spoon, which is right here, and I can just scoop it into the bowl. It's already cut, already diced. See how easy that was? And then I can just separate it, and it separates into pieces. And you know what? I am really in the mood for avocado, so I'm going to add the other half too. How many of you like avocado? Oh, well, should we add the rest? Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then we're going to serve some samples. So they can start bringing the samples out. And in the meantime, I'll finish this and I'll answer questions. So who has questions? No, I answered all your questions, and you have no questions of Cherie, Soria, Master Chef. Okay. how do you know when an avocado is ready to use? Well, first of all, I want to talk about how to choose an avocado, because a lot of people don't know how to choose avocados. One of the things that you want to look for is a nice black skin, and you want to have the little knob still in the avocado. Here it is. I took it off of here. This little thing here. You want to make sure that that is in place when you buy the avocado. If it's not in place, what can happen is the avocado can be moldy because there's nothing to protect the flesh. All right? Then you want to feel it, just barely depress it right there where the knob is. That's where it starts to ripen first. That's where the stem has been. And that's where it starts to ripen first. So that's the area that you want to check. You don't want to be pushing your fingers in and molesting it in the middle. I mean, that would be like somebody poking you here, right? So you don't want to do that, because then you'll end up with brown spots. Personally, I prefer to buy avocados by the case, share them with friends, and ripen them in different areas of your house. So if you have them in the garage, and then in your laundry room, and then in your kitchen, in different areas, they will ripen at different rates. And then you always have ripe avocados. And then one day before they're ripe, you look at them every day, you check them out, and you think, this is going to be ripe tomorrow. You put them in the refrigerator, and they'll last for 2 weeks. But if you wait until they're ripe, and you put them in the refrigerator, they'll continue to ripen. So they have to be 1 day away from being ripe. Well, what do you think? Wow. Wow. I heard a wow. All right. That's good news. And isn't this beautiful? Oh, my gosh. I can't wait for lunch. This is what I'm going to have. And I am going to wrap that cabbage in a lettuce leaf, in a romaine leaf. And then I'm going to put some of the salsa on top of it. And I am going to be in heaven. Now, here's something that I didn't do. I didn't put the pumpkin seeds on top. What do you think? Oh my goodness. Pumpkin seeds are so popular in Mexico. It adds a little bit of a crunch. It adds a little bit more of the nutrient density that I want. Pumpkin seeds are really health promoting. So let's get both of these dishes out, shall we? So that the camera can feast on the beauty of Mexico. Comienda Pura Vida. Thank you. Thank you. And these are 2 dishes that we have in the cafe. So if you want to join me for lunch, you can go and get yours. And I have mine. And I'll share with you. This is actually a serving size for 4, I think. You have to look in your recipe book. What does the recipe say? I think that the cabbage is a serving for 3 to 4. Is that right? Yeah.
Did you have 3 things on these, or were these
I didn't do it. They might have. Pardon? They're both 3 servings. They're both three servings. So, okay, another question? Okay, I have a question about sea vegetables. What are my feelings about it? I think sea vegetables should be eaten every day. I am a big believer in sea vegetables. Not a lot. If it's powdered, a teaspoon on a salad, sprinkled on a salad like dulse, or maybe at the most I would say a couple of tablespoons, if it's not powdered and fresh, in a salad is enough to give you enough iodine for the day. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure, and I know we have another great demo coming up. You're welcome.